Hail travelers, and welcome to the Knight's Realm. Here in the realm of Camelot, I, the Guardian Knight, venture deep into the archives of popular culture and entertainment to bring you all my own perspective on such matters. Bumblebee made a surprising splash both commercially and in audience reactions. As such, a sequel was greenlit very quickly. Unfortunately, said sequel would be delayed by multiple factors, including creative differences, a worldwide plague, and Industrial Light and Magic being tied up with work on Transformers 1. Originally slated to come out in 2020, this sequel, Transformers Rise of the Beasts, would not release until 3 years later in 2023. It opened to disappointing box office returns, bit of a theme lately, partially due to coming out around the same time as the hotly anticipated Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, partially due to franchise fatigue, partially due to people only going to theaters for movies they really want to watch these days, and partially due to a lackluster marketing campaign. Again. But where Transformers 1 suffered from poorly edited trailers that made it look like a Pixar knockoff, Rise of the Beasts barely had any marketing until right down to the wire. And what marketing there was evoked the Bayverse more than it did Bumblebee, causing some people to step back immediately. It got to the point that the only people that were hyped about it were Transformers nerds and not even all of us. But box office isn't the sole determiner of a film's quality. John Carpenter's The Thing was a box office bomb, and that movie is widely beloved these days. Literally everyone who has watched Transformers 1 has given it praise. The Mummy was also released to lackluster numbers, but gained enough love after theaters that it earned a sequel. On the flip side, Captain Marvel was an incredibly successful movie, but one that has received many scathing reviews. The Star Wars sequels are much the same. Unfortunately, studios only really base success off of box office returns, despite the fact that in the age of streaming, that's not really a good metric for judging the success of a film, especially in this post-2020 world where people just aren't going to theaters as often anymore, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a nerd with a YouTube channel. All that aside, was Rise of the Beasts worth the wait? Did it live up to the standards set by Bumblebee? Kind of. Okay, so this movie is difficult for me, because there are parts that I absolutely love, and parts that I do not like at all. I don't think it does a lot wrong, but I also don't think it does enough right. And the few things it does do outright wrong are enough to knock it down a couple pegs. Now, I have actually reviewed Rise of the Beasts on this channel before, on one of my earliest videos. Don't watch it. I was still figuring stuff out, I just kind of ramble at the camera for an hour, and my beard needed a trim badly. I was also much kinder to the movie in that review, mostly because I was still operating under a bit of recency bias combined with the fact that I wanted to like the movie more than I actually did. I was the same with the Star Wars sequels, Batman vs. Superman, Spider-Man Far From Home, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Transformers Prime Season 3, and RID 15. Because I'm a guy who wants to like things. I hate being negative. When I am outright critical of a movie upon release, or my first time watching, or a trailer, it has to be absolutely terrible. And Rise of the Beast wasn't terrible, but it was disappointing. But why? Let me show you. Join me as we delve deep beneath the castle and begin our quest. Our movie begins, similarly to the first Bay film, in deep space. However, instead of Optimus Prime narrating it, it's Optimus Primal, known to Beast Wars fans as the leader of the Maximals, or at least of that team of Maximals. He is played here not by Gary Chalk, who iconically played Primal in Beast Wars and Beast Machines, before then taking on the role of Optimus Prime in the Unicron trilogy, but by Ron Perlman, who played Primal in more modern shows like the Prime Wars trilogy. Primal tells us of Unicron and his most powerful servant, our main antagonist, Scourge, who have come to the Maximal homeworld, what wider TF nerds would call Jungle Planet or Animatron, or one of many other names that it's had over the years, in order to attain the Transwarp Key, an artifact that will allow Unicron to traverse time and space and consume as many worlds as he desires. Apelink, Primal's predecessor, gives Primal the Transwarp Key as Unicron enters Animatron's orbit while staying behind to fight Scourge. The fight is over swiftly, with Scourge terminating Apelink. Fortunately, Primal and the other Maximals are able to escape with the key. In retaliation, Unicron devours Animatron and sends Scourge out into the universe to find the key. We cut to 1994 and are introduced to our new human protagonist, Noah Diaz. Noah is a veteran who is down on his luck, despite his skills with electronics. He has a younger brother, Chris, who has sickle cell disease, and a hard-working single mother. whose name we never learn. Noah heads to a job interview, one that doesn't end well due to a history of insubordination in the army. That, together with his brother's treatments being denied due to a lack of money, causes Noah to go down a path of crime. He teams up with his shady friend, Reek, to steal a car. Unfortunately, this car turns out to be more than meets the eye. Yes, I am going to say that every chance I get. While Noah goes about his life, we meet the other human protagonist, Elena Wallace, a young intern at the Natural History Museum on Ellis Island. Elena is far more qualified and knowledgeable than her boss, Jillian, but is not truly appreciated for this fact. A strange statue turns up at the museum, one that doesn't appear to coincide with any real-world civilization, though its hawk-like shape causes Jillian to surmise it's the god Horus from Egyptian mythology. While Noah attempts to steal the car, Elena sneaks into the museum lab to run tests on the statue. In the process, it crumbles, revealing half of the transwarp key. The key sends out a signal at a frequency that can only be seen by Cybertronian eyes, and we are reintroduced to Optimus Prime, together with Bumblebee and RC. Optimus recognizes the transwarp key for what it is and sends out a message to all Autobots in the vicinity. One such Autobot is the car Noah is stealing, Mirage. Mirage rolls out after Prime's signal, taking Noah along and inciting a police chase. They evade the cops and arrive at the Autobot hideout, where Mirage transforms and reveals himself to Noah. The other Autobots arrive and are unhappy at Noah's presence, especially Optimus, who is out of sorts with his inability to protect Cybertron and mistrustful of humans by and large. I will definitely talk about this in the character section. He is forced to accept Noah's presence, however, when Mirage points out that the human can sneak into the museum and steal the key. Both Optimus and Noah are hesitant, but agree to the plan. As Noah and Mirage sneak onto museum grounds, Optimus expresses his dislike of the plan and distrust of humans, all while 3 meteors land in the Hudson. These meteors are Scourge and his chief henchmen, Nightbird and Battletrap. The Terrorcons, for that is their name, attack the museum while Noah and Elena are inside. The 2 humans, though initially wary of each other, flee with the key half from Scourge's smaller minions, apparently named Sweeps after the servants of Scourge from G1, though that is never mentioned in the movie. The Autobots engage the Terrorcons, but despite outnumbering them are entirely outmatched, even Optimus, who Scourge entirely dominates on the battlefield. The Terrorcons gain the key, and Bumblebee is fatally injured by Scourge, who takes his insignia, as he had Apelinks. The other Autobots are saved by the timely arrival of Airazor, one of the Maximals. Optimus and Noah clash even further about the botched mission, but Airazor reveals that the second half of the key is out of Scourge's reach, something which Scourge himself learns the hard way when Unicron punishes him for failing him. The Autobots, humans, and Airazor go to Peru, where the other half of the key is hidden, aboard the Titanic Autobot Stratosphere. En route, Noah suggests to Elena that the key should be destroyed in order to prevent Unicron from destroying the Earth, stating that they need to look out for their own. There, they are greeted by Wheeljack, who joins the team. They find the location of the key beneath a church built over ancient Inca ruins, but they are prevented from going in swinging because of the festival of Inti Raymi that has taken up the entirety of the city. The humans go in on foot, Mirage giving Noah a part of himself to use as a weapon, but the Terrorcons have arrived. Scourge sends one of his sweeps after the humans, who discover the ancient temple beneath a seal marked with Maximal insignias. Unfortunately, the key is not present. Noah is able to destroy the sweep following them, named Freezer, apparently, and he and Elena attempt to escape the catacombs. The Autobots and Terrorcons engage in a chase, and Optimus and Scourge have a brief duel. Airazor is once again able to separate the 2 groups, but this time she is struck by some form of dark energon-infused cosmic rust fired from Scourge's cannon. Noah and Elena emerge into a wooded region where they are ambushed by Optimus Primal. The other Autobots arrive, and so do the Maximals Cheetor and Rhinox. There is a standoff between the Autobots and Maximals that is diffused by Airazor. Optimus Primal, once realizing who the Autobots are, guides them to a hidden village where he had entrusted the key to the villagers, a fact which surprises Optimus Prime. Noah continues to insist that the key must be destroyed, but Elena pushes back, suggesting that Noah and Optimus aren't so different. Primal reveals a large quantity of inert energon, a slab of which Bumblebee is placed on as a sort of resting place. Scourge's corruption overtakes Airazor, and she begins to attack the Autobots, humans, and Maximals. Noah runs off with the key, but Optimus is able to convince him not to destroy it. Unfortunately, Airazor gets a hold of it, and Elena, who picked it up, and delivers it to Scourge. Primal is forced to kill Airazor, and the Terrorcons get away with the completed key. Optimus and Noah finally have a heart-to-heart, and the Autobots, humans, and Maximals prepare to engage the Terrorcons. Scourge activates the key and creates a space bridge of sorts powered by the transwarp energy of the key. The bots engage the Terracons and their minions, who appear out of nowhere, while Noah and Elena sneak through conveniently placed access tunnels to reach the console and deactivate the transwarp. The energy of the transwarp activates the inner energon, and Bumblebee is revived. Mirage is severely injured by Scourge and transforms into an exosuit for Noah. Unicron begins to emerge from the portal. Nightbird and Battletrap are both defeated and destroyed, and Optimus engages in his rematch with Scourge. The Terracon leader destroys the console to prevent the transwarp from being stopped, but is slain in the process by Optimus. Optimus is forced to make a choice between the key and Earth, and chooses Earth, destroying the key and sending Unicron back through the portal. He is nearly sucked into the portal, but is saved by Noah and Primal. The Autobots return to the States with the humans, and Noah both repairs Mirage and is recruited into G.I. Joe, while Elena becomes recognized for her efforts in finding the temple beneath the monastery. Definitely a more complex plot than Bumblebee, but that's not necessarily a good thing. Before I dissect the plot, though, let's dissect the characters, because I have a lot to say on that front. Like before, I will not be discussing minor characters who do not affect the plot or do not have speaking lines. There are less side characters in this one and a lot more major characters. In terms of the secondary characters we'll be discussing, from least to most important, we have Mr. Bishop, Hospital Admin Green, Jillian, Noah's mom, Agent Burke, Reek, Chris, Apelink, Rhinox, Stratosphere, Battletrap, Cheetor, Nightbird, Wheeljack, Bumblebee, and Unicron. Our primary characters are RC, Airraiser, Optimus Primal, Mirage, Elena, Scourge, Noah, and Optimus Prime. B is not a main character this time around, as he sits out most of the plot. But I'll get to him. Mr. Bishop is an ex-military head of a security firm. He only appears in one scene, telling Noah he's not going to hire him. Bishop is an austere man who values discipline, and may or may not be racist. On my first viewing of the movie, I thought he was only dismissive of Noah for his past insubordination. But on rewatch, he may have been one of many racist characters included in the film. There's not enough to be concrete on that, as someone like you could be what I thought it was before, but I thought I'd bring it up nonetheless. I will be discussing this particular point much later in the video. He is a straightforward character and one whose stance is understandable if we don't assign prejudice to his actions. Admin Green is the one who refused to treat Chris due to the Diaz's lack of funds. She, like Bishop, is portrayed in an antagonistic manner. However, her stance is even more understandable than his. Though we definitely empathize with Noah and his family, the simple fact is that non-charity hospitals are businesses, and as such require payment. Not going to start a debate over healthcare in the United States. I don't use my channel to promote political or social issues, but the simple fact of the matter is that Noah's family has an outstanding balance. They cannot afford treatments. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that is a fact. Once more, a character who is understandable, despite the protagonist's point of view. Jillian is, much like Tina in the last movie, a character who I hate and not for in-universe reasons. She is another archetype, the incompetent boss who relies on their underappreciated subordinate for everything. Now, while this character type certainly exists in real life, as does the mean girl, the way she is portrayed is cartoonish, like Tina before her. She too appears to be somewhat racist, but unlike Bishop, feels more like a straw man than a character. She is annoying, one-dimensional, and ultimately pointless. Noah's mother appears surprisingly scarcely, and as I mentioned before, does not even have a name. There's honestly not much to say about her other than she's a hard-working mother and she loves her kids. Not exactly the next Prince Zuko or anything. Agent Burke is an enigma. Being a member of G.I. Joe, but not one that shares a name with any existing Joe, leaves one who knows the Joes pretty in-depth puzzled. As a character, he is straightforwardly mysterious, and that's really all he needs to be. But I do find myself wondering if Burke is a pseudonym, and he's either G.I. Joe Colton, the one for whom the Joes are named, General Clayton Hawk Abernathy, or some other high-ranking G.I. Joe character. Nothing really more to say on that front until the potential future movie that may or may not even happen. Reek is a fun character, and one that I quite enjoyed. He's shady, unscrupulous, and entirely morally bankrupt, and neither he nor the film pretend otherwise. He is the reason Noah gets involved with the Autobots in the first place, putting Noah up to steal the car that turns out to be Mirage. A small character with a decent role, and one that was pretty funny while he was on screen. Chris, Noah's brother, is adorable, and a little too important to the plot. One of the scenes that kind of made me cringe was when he was giving Noah a pep talk while the literal god of death was hovering over the earth. Chris should have been Noah's motivation, and that's it. He didn't need to have camaraderie with Mirage, he didn't need to call into the final battle, he should have just been an ever-looming presence in the back of our heads. Ape-Link is an obscure character in the Transformers multiverse, but one that I appreciate them adding. Though him handing the transwarp key to Primal puts the plot in motion, he himself is on screen relatively briefly. He shows up, and then he dies. Nice addition, plays his role well enough, nothing more to say. Rhinox is the first character that really bothers me. I didn't like Jillian, sure, but she appeared in 2 scenes and then never again. Rhinox is a pretty important character in Beast Wars canon. He's strong but gentle, both the brains and the brawn of the Maximals, Primal's most loyal companion. He's basically Ironhide and Ratchet rolled into one character. And he's nothing in this movie. He just goes, grrr. This was such a cool character that the filmmakers had at their fingertips, and they did nothing. Sadly, that is not the last time I'll say that in this review, though this one is probably the worst. Stratosphere, comparatively, is a minor character that doesn't really bother me with how minor he is. He's mostly here as a means of transport and a bit of comic relief. Though, to gas myself up a bit, I think I handled him a little better in my Revenge of the Fallen rewrite, with him actually taking part in the final battle and sacrificing himself to take down the Nemesis. That being said, Stratosphere is perfectly fine in this movie. Battletrap is the least personified of the Terrorcons, being just a big guy who likes fighting. Nothing wrong with that in principle, but with such a limited number of bad guys, they really should have done more with him. Soundwave had more personality than this guy, with under a minute of screen time in Bumblebee, not even to mention Shatter and Dropkick. Unlike Rhinox, I'm not offended by his lack of personality, but I do find it to be a missed opportunity. Cheetor I am very disappointed in. He had a few lines, true, but I learned basically nothing about him from those lines. We had Cheetor and Bumblebee on screen together, and we didn't do anything with that other than a really cool shot for the trailers. He never even calls Primal Big Bot, come on. Cheetor and Rhinox are the 2 characters that bother me the most in this movie, as the original Maximal team had such personality. But aside from Primal and Airazor, we see none of that here. I was actually pleasantly surprised by Nightbird upon rewatch. She's not the deepest of characters, but she fills her role decently enough as the sleek, silent assassin of the Terrorcons. She has a fair few threatening lines and is a decent enough threat. Of course, Nightbird's a pretty simple character in the general universe anyway, so she actually has a leg up over most of her other versions. And now, Pablo. Oy. Okay, I'm gonna rant for a second. Bumblebee had the perfect design for a movie Wheeljack. He looked awesome. B, Prime, and RC all resembled their previous film looks decently enough, with a few minor changes here and there, so why didn't they do the same with Wheeljack? Wheeljack has one of the most iconic designs out of any Transformer. His fins even glowed in Bumblebee, come on! That they changed from that awesome design to this ugly design is baffling. Yes, I know that's subjective, but the Urkel-esque look is just hideous to me. It's so on the nose. Oh, let's make the nerdy character look like the nerd emoji. He's a robot from space. Why does he need glasses? Why does he have suspenders? Why did you abandon a perfectly good design? And on top of that, they don't even do anything with that so-called nerdy persona. Wheeljack is an engineer, an inventor. Shut up, Cade. But this guy? Well, he knows about butterflies and Peruvian cultural celebration, but Wheeljack is not the Autobots' resident historian. That's Optimus. Okay, calming down. Wheeljack is barely a character with a couple moments of not very good comedy. So even if he did look good, I'd still complain because they didn't do anything with him. Running theme. As said earlier, B is a side character in this movie because of his lack of screen time, compared to the other main bots. However, his characterization is in line with how he is in Bumblebee, so I have no complaints, except in the story department, but I'll get there. Unicron is more of a looming presence than an actual character, but I don't mind that. Unicron is basically the Sauron/Morgoth of Transformers, so him being that threat on the horizon is perfectly fine. though I am a sucker for the characterization he gets in Armada through Sideways, which you probably could have told if Wrath of Unicron is anything to go off of. If anything, my only problem with Unicron is that he shouldn't have been introduced this soon in the timeline. Side characters done, main characters now. RC is more characterized than the other robots I've mentioned thus far, though that's not saying much. She's serious and snarky, skilled in a fight despite her small size, and seems to be the de facto second-in-command to Optimus. Clearly, they took inspiration from Prime RC, but with none of the deeper characterization that character received. Airazor is quite different from her Beast Wars counterpart, being a peer to Primal and a sort of advisor rather than his junior, who is young and naive, but I like her in Rise of the Beasts. Her death scene was actually pretty impactful. I only wish she transformed. Optimus Primal is the best character in the movie, and it sucks that he's not in it more. I do miss Gary Chalk's performance, but Ron Perlman is Ron Perlman. He does as amazingly as you'd expect. Primal is honorable, loyal, compassionate, gentle, a skilled warrior, and a bit prone to rage. He is unused to the idea of leadership, but is surprisingly gifted at it. Despite his hesitance, he is shown to be quite wise, though he is prone to naivete in matters of hero worship. I have zero complaints about Primal in the character writing department, and he is, in fact, my favorite character in the movie. The fact that this isn't the Optimus I usually hold as my favorite should tell you something. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Mirage is a kind of character I come across often in Transformers. I like the character, but he shouldn't have that name. Prime Wheeljack, Armada Blur, and Wheeljack come to think of it, Animated Bumblebee, RID-01 Scourge, so that one at least has a reason, Energon Rodimus, AoE Hound, and Cybertron Snarl. All characters I like, but that need different names because they do not act like the characters whose names they're using at all. Sometimes you'll have a character like Knockout, Dreadwing, Lugnut, Bulkhead, Red Alert, Dropkick, Swerve, Tailgate, etc., who didn't really have any established characterization or consistent characterization until one adaptation or another solidified them. Prime, Animated, Armada, Bumblebee, IDW, in order for the above characters. Sometimes you'll have a character who's different in certain adaptations, and it works for that series, like Armada Starscream, Thrust, and Jetfire, Animated Prowl, Ultra Magnus, Optimus, and the other Seekers, IDW Prowl, and Prime RC. But typically, deviating heavily from a character set characterization is a recipe for disaster. I have plenty of examples of characters I hate that have names of characters I love, Energon Mirage, Armada Cyclonus, RID-15 Sideswipe. But Mirage is a different category. Now, if you named this guy Blue Streak or Sideswipe or Hotshot or any one of a number of reckless, showboating, but ultimately good-hearted young bots, I'd be so down. But Mirage is supposed to be a refined pacifist with a severe case of homesickness. So giving this character that name makes him a poor adaptation. Again, I like him, I think he's cool, I enjoy every time he's on screen, but he needs a different name. Heck, name him Sideburn, bring back that character from RID-01. As a character, he's great. He's one of the better ones in the movie. As Mirage, nah. Elena is a character who honestly feels like an afterthought. Her characterization is very hollow in comparison to Noah, who I will get to. With Noah, we meet his family, we see how down on his luck he is, we feel for him, he's been beaten down by life, and though we can understand the perspectives of Bishop and Green, we're still at least somewhat on Noah's side and want to see him overcome his struggles. Elena, she has a bad boss. She keeps talking about wanting to be recognized in her field, but the simple fact is that she hasn't done anything. She's book smart, sure, but that's only the beginning. It's like she thinks that because she's smarter than the average bear, if you get that reference, you are elite, she deserves a chance at recognition. This is why I called Jillian a straw man earlier. She's the incompetent museum curator who doesn't know anything about history, but if that were true, why would she have a job at a museum? Aside from janitor or something. You don't just get a job like that because you're attractive or rich or white or anything. She has to know something, if not everything. Elena is an intern, so I highly doubt she was some package deal with Jillian when she got hired. Like, I get what they're going for, and if Jillian was Elena's stepsister or best friend or something, or someone else who took credit for her discoveries, that would make a little more sense. Elena's struggles immediately feel less real than Noah, Charlie, or even Sam friggin' Witwicky. She's also got less screen presence than Haley Steinfeld, Anthony Ramos, and even Shia LaBeouf. Now, I haven't seen anything else Dominique Fishback has been in, or at least I don't think I have, so I don't know how good of an actress she truly is. but she did not impress me in this movie. She also lacks any sort of arc. Elena, that is. She doesn't change as a person, she just reveals that she found the temple and becomes successful seemingly overnight. Yay? I am unimpressed by this character and honestly feel like she should have been cut. Give more time to flesh out Noah. The movie wants her to be just as important as Noah, but she lacks the emotional narrative threads for that to be believable. In contrast, I'm going to praise the Bayverse for a second. Michaela Baines was written as a love interest, a side character in Sam's story. And yet she's one of my favorite characters in the first movie. She has depth to her, she's important without the film insisting that she is, but the movie never pretends that she's the protagonist. Though honestly she should have been, because she's a far better character than Sam was. If I wasn't going the Carly route in my rewrites, I might have just erased Sam entirely and put Michaela as the main character, but I wanted to do the Witwickies, so. When the love interest in the Bayverse is a better character than one of your protagonists, you done messed up. Scourge is awesome. I really like this villain. He's a great mashup of a couple different versions of the character. He has a great presence, an intimidating voice, and feels like an actual threat. Though he lacks the depth of Dark of the Moon Sentinel or Transformers 1 Megatron, he's still a great villain. Only time I thought he suffered was in one specific line reading near the end where he said, "Master, the reinforcements." Until that point, I enjoyed Peter Dinklage's performance, but that line reading was a little flat. That does happen from time to time. Ewan McGregor is largely amazing as Obi-Wan Kenobi, but when he says, "You have done that yourself," in Revenge of the Sith, that could have used another take or two. Yeah, I like Scourge a lot. Not the greatest Transformers villain ever, but a perfectly serviceable one-off like Shatter and Dropkick before him. Easily better than the Fallen and Revenge of the Fallen, but I'd rank both Megatron in the first one and Sentinel in the third one over him. Better than Lockdown, and definitely better than Quintessa. Noah is a great character. I actually deeply enjoyed him. There's a bit of a pattern I've noticed between this movie and Bumblebee. The main human character is great, but the secondary one is less so. Charlie and Noah, banger. Memo and Elena should have been cut. Noah, unlike most human characters before him, has seen combat, so him being unflinching in the face of danger made sense. He was also given an actual battle suit, so him going up against Scourge wasn't unbelievable. His struggles, as I said, made sense, and his character arc of overcoming his pride and take care of our own mentality were great. If there's one thing I'd like out of future installments, if they ever happen, Hasbro, Paramount, it's having Noah and Charlie team up. And finally, Optimus Prime. If there is any character who sums up my feelings on this movie, it is Optimus. There are parts of Prime's story that I love, and parts that I strongly dislike. Peter Cullen is amazing as ever. I do like the whole carrying the weight of his decisions on his shoulders thing. When he and Noah connected was a great scene. I loved him in the third act leading the charge, as he should. But I do not like Grumpimus Prime. Optimus has been stoic in the past. He's been angry, taciturn, solitary, but grumpy, crotchety, doesn't feel right. He also unfortunately readopts many of his Bayverse counterparts' more bloodthirsty attributes. Though I can kind of understand it in this case, still not a fan though. When I first reviewed the movie, I downplayed this aspect of Optimus, suggesting that it was nowhere near as egregious as the Bay version. Upon re-reviewing this entire series though, I was very unfair in that assertion. Rise of the Beast Optimus is like somewhere between classic Prime and his ROTF to AoE counterparts. And unlike Bay Prime, he seems to lack a lot of the wisdom intrinsic to his character. He's mistrustful, cranky, single-minded, bossy, and more than a little bloodthirsty with Scourge and the Terracons. Stephen Cable Jr. said that they wanted to portray a Prime who had yet to learn the wisdom of his typical self, but that doesn't really make sense for the story the movie is telling. The war has been raging for hundreds if not millions of years, and Optimus has been there from the beginning. Transformers 1 portraying Orion as reckless, naive, and a bit oblivious worked, because he was Orion Pax, not Optimus Prime. Animated having a bossy, stodgy, occasionally cranky Prime worked, because he was young and still learning. But Rise of the Beast Optimus is an old bot. He's been doing this for a long time. I admire the desire to give Prime an arc, and I think they had the right idea with him blaming himself for abandoning Cybertron, But him being distrustful of humans? Him blaming Noah for losing the key? Him constantly wanting to murder Scourge without thought to the more important mission? That doesn't feel like Optimus Prime. Being homesick and mistrustful sound more like Mirage. Being bossy and constantly having a stick up his tailpipe sounds like Prowl. Wanting revenge on Scourge sounds like Ironhide. He doesn't feel like a psycho in this movie, but he doesn't feel like Prime either. Until the third act, when he suddenly acts like his normal self again. When I gave Optimus a character arc in my rewrites, I did one I felt made sense, carrying the weight of his decisions, doubting himself, fearing that he brought this destruction on his own people on Earth. Him withholding tech from the humans post-AoE was him avoiding another cemetery wind and trying to save the humans from themselves. Leaving Earth in Wrath of Unicron was wanting to prevent Chicago or Hong Kong from happening again. But I like to think I made him feel like Optimus Prime all the way through, even when he was struggling or doubting himself. Optimus needs to be written like Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Uncle Iroh, or Captain America, or movie Aragorn. Room for growth, but he's still him. He's still heroic from the get-go, because he's been doing this for a while. Yeah, some adaptations go full book Aragorn, or Golden Age Superman, or pre-La Morte d'Arthur King Arthur, and make him be basically perfect with little to no character growth, but honestly, I will take that over him acting wildly out of character like in the later Bay movies, IDW, or this movie. There is a way to give a character depth without compromising who they are at their core, and if you want them to build to that character, go back to when they were younger so it makes sense. But honestly, even then, animated Optimus and one Orion feel wiser than this guy. So I like the idea that they were going for, but the execution was hit or miss, and unfortunately I think it was mostly miss. Also, give him his mask the whole movie, what are we doing? But y'all already know my opinion on that. So, characters. A lot more to say than Bumblebee, and unfortunately it wasn't anywhere near as positive. Noah, Scourge, Nightbeard, Stratosphere, and Primal are the only characters I have no problems with. RC, Cheetor, Rhinox, and Battletrap sorely needed more screen time. Eraser and Mirage I have mild issues with, but like them overall. Elena and her entire story arc were both meh. Optimus just wasn't working for me. Wheeljack, just no. And the rest of the characters filled their roles acceptably, except Jillian, who should be deleted from existence. But what about the plot? How does that hold up? As mentioned earlier, the plot of Rise of the Beast is more complex than Bumblebee's, with a lot more moving parts. We have the Autobots seeking a way home, the Maximals protecting the key, Scourge looking for the key, Unicron's inevitable arrival, Noah trying to pay for his brother's treatments, Elena seeking recognition, Noah and Optimus both wanting to protect their own, G.I. Joe working in the background, and Bumblebee's death and revival. Now, before we dissect the plot, let's take a look at what drives the plot. The Trans-Warp Key, which is basically a portable space bridge generator. It's the pillars from Dark of the Moon, but more poorly explained. Transformers is a franchise that has often relied on MacGuffins, from Energon in G1 to the Minicons in Armada, the Allspark in the first movie, the Cyberplanet Keys in Cybertron. Sometimes it even has multiple, like in Prime. The presence of such a plot device is not, inherently, a problem. However, not all MacGuffins are created equal. The Allspark and the Pillars were effective in their respective movies, and even the Matrix worked somewhat in Revenge of the Fallen, even if it was strange that Optimus didn't already have it. But the Seed, not so much. The Transwarp Key, unfortunately, falls more on the Seed side than the Allspark side. Space travel is something that the Transformers are more than effective at throughout their various incarnations, be it through ships or pods or through space bridge technology. Beyond that, Unicron is a very patient being and has traversed the universe countless times. Him being trapped in a far-off galaxy doesn't make much sense. How many millennia passed between Jungle Planet's destruction and Elena triggering the signal? If we take a brief glance in the direction of the source material, Beast Wars, we have at least, 4 million years or so. So what, was Unicron just chilling until Scourge contacted him? Jungle Planet is typically in the same system as Cybertron, or at least very close to that same system, and the Autobots reached Earth in no time back in Bumblebee. You're telling me that they reached Earth in pods within weeks, and Unicron, a literal god, spent millions of years stuck where he was? No one's motives for wanting the key make much sense. Unless there is some dark magic keeping Unicron where he is, he shouldn't need the key as anything other than a convenience. To send his greatest servant to collect this key feels like an overexertion of resources. Don't you have lesser guys that can pick that up? And the Autobots wanting the key makes even less sense. Why are you looking for a way home? There's still Decepticons there, right? And there's 6 of you here. What are 6 of you going to do against all of the cons on Cybertron? Rewatching this movie right after rewatching Bumblebee opened up some interesting plot issues. In Bumblebee, Optimus tells Bee that Earth is intended to be a foothold, somewhere the Autobots can establish a base and regroup. Not a pit stop, as Mirage calls it in this movie. The Autobots were driven off Cybertron, so they needed somewhere to regroup, a location from which they could fight on, a location they needed to keep secret. The clear point was that all of the surviving Autobots would come to Earth and prepare for a counterattack against the cons. But if these 6 Yahoos are the only surviving Autobots, then Cybertron is doomed. In Prime, it was clear that there were many, many Autobots scattered throughout the universe. Even in the Bayverse, that was clear. But that's not the case here. Where is Ironhide, Ratchet, Brawn? They were all in Bumblebee, and it seemed like they escaped. Where's Jazz? Prowl, Hound, Hot Rod, Red Alert, Bulkhead, Drift, Gears, Windcharger, Hoist, Smokescreen, Blue Streak? Optimus said, calling all Autobots, so unless their comms are broken or they're in some other country for some reason, like Wheeljack, they aren't here. Optimus, are you really going to take 6 guys and retake Cybertron? It's not very wise. The scope of the key's power is also inconsistent. At one point, destroying it causes a massive explosion, but then how were the Maximals able to split it? Shouldn't that have caused some problems? It's also able to generate a massive space bridge thingy, somehow, but it can be shut down with an access code? What? And then Optimus is able to completely destroy it with a broken blade, and it's implied that Noah could have destroyed it with his laser gauntlet? But if he had, wouldn't it have exploded and atomized him? Also, was Unicron going to eat Earth while the key was still on it? That last one's a bit more of a nitpick, I'll admit. And why didn't the Maximals just actually destroy it? They weren't going anywhere else after landing on Earth, so why keep it? It's not like the Allspark, which is a source of Energon, or the Matrix, or the key to Vector Sigma, or the Minicons, or the Cyberplanet keys. There's a lot of keys. Each of these had a clear reason why they needed to be preserved. Both times the Allspark was destroyed in Movie 1 and Animated, it was for a reason, and its energy survived after the fact. The nature of the key honestly feels like an afterthought. The writers needed an object to inspire the plot, and that's as far as it went. The Transwarp key desperately needed a few revisions in its capabilities and its reasons for being valuable. Because when Dark of the Moon has a better space bridge MacGuffin, we're not on great footing. Heck, in G1 Prime and Animated, the Decepticons build their own space bridges. They only struggled in Animated because that technology was classified and hoarded by the Autobots in order to both win the Ancient War and maintain a foothold over Cybertronian assets across the galaxy. And the Autobots couldn't build a space bridge without the Forge of Solus Prime and Transformers Prime because they had access to very limited Cybertronian tech that they augmented with Earth tech. Useful, but nowhere near standard for traversing galaxies. But in this movie, we're supposed to believe that intergalactic travel is only possible through space magic. Not space bridges, not even space ships. Magic. This is a far cry from a source of energon, or the creation of life, or a power boost, or the ability to light one's darkest hour. Then, yeah. The main driving force behind the plot is the source of many of said plot's issues. But good stories can still be told around lazy or confusing plot devices, so let's analyze the rest of the plot. Let's start with the Maximal subplot. There are elements in this part of the plot that, if they were expanded upon, could have fixed some things with the key. Unicron devours Jungle Planet and the Maximals flee to prehistoric Earth. When there, they decide to divide the key and split into 2 teams. One led by Ares goes to Sudan, while the other, led by Primal, goes to Peru. For a long, long time, they lie in wait until Ares' half of the key is discovered and taken to New York. Later, the other surviving Maximals are roped into the plot, and it's revealed that Optimus Primal hid his half of the key among human villagers with which he coexisted. It is also here where we learn that Primal was named for Prime, as in the original Beast Wars, and Ares mentions earlier that she is a warrior from the Autobots' past and future. And here is where I wish they would have just committed. In the original Beast Wars canon, the Maximals and Predacons are from centuries in the future. long after the Autobot-Decepticon War. Optimus Primal's team of Maximals pursued a crew of Predacon criminals led by one calling himself Megatron across space. Their pursuit, through transwarp technology, caused them to travel back in time to prehistoric Earth, thus causing them to be both from the past and the future. The future of Cybertron and the past of Earth. They thus end up affecting the past of the Autobots and Decepticons, who are crashed not too far from where the Maximals and Predacons take up base, while also being affected by them in the future. But that is never made explicit in Rise of the Beasts. Was the Jungle Planet colony contemporary with Cybertron? In the future? If it was either of those, how did they end up on Earth prior to Egypt and the Incan Empire? There is an easy solution, and one that can somewhat solve the Unicron key problem. And that is making the transwarp key used for time travel, as well as intergalactic travel. Again, the powers of this are never made explicit in the movie. Travel through time and space is one of those terms that means something different in every single sci-fi property. Sometimes it just means space travel, and the time part is in reference to light years or any other sort of space temporality. Other times it is more literal, as in it can travel through both space, or distance, and time, like in Doctor Who. Which the movie is using is never explained. Now, if I take a glance once more in the direction of the source material, transwarp energy can be used to travel through time. That's how the Maximals and Predacons ended up on prehistoric Earth in the first place. But again, the movie doesn't explain this. This is a major issue I have with adaptations. They should strive to be faithful to their source material, yes. Faithful, not exact. But they should also stand alone as their own story. If I have to read the book in order to understand the plot of the movie, then the movie has failed. My reading of the book should enhance my experience while watching the movie, but it shouldn't be a requirement. For example, Lord of the Rings. The basic story is all present in the movies with some minor tweaks. I do not need to read the books to understand the movies. However, I have read the books, and there are things in the movies that are enhanced by that knowledge. For example, the Witch King's death. In the movies, it seems like a typical prophecy fulfillment with the no man can kill me thing, while in the books there's a bit more to it. Yes, Éowyn does fulfill Glorfindel's prophecy, but the prophecy itself is not why the Witch King dies. The dagger Mary stabs the Witch King with was enchanted specifically to fight against beings such as him anciently. When it pierced his armor, the curse tethering him to life was effectively broken, allowing Éowyn to finish the fight. The movie explanation already works because this is a fantasy movie, and loopholes like that happen all the time in that genre, but book knowledge makes that scene even better. I will admit, no, this is one plot point that I wish was explained more in the film. Most of the stuff that was left out I understand and in some cases outright prefer, but the lack of the Barrow Dagger explanation is a minor problem I have with the movies as adaptations. But as a standalone piece of media, it doesn't bother me. This is purely an adaptation thing. There is a big difference between me critiquing something as a movie or show and critiquing it as an adaptation. I think Lord of the Rings is pretty great in both regards. I only have 3 big issues and a handful of minor issues from an adaptational standpoint, and a handful of minor issues and 1 big issue from a movie standpoint. But we're talking Transformers, not Tolkien. And unlike The Witch King, where an explanation is given in the film, there is no explanation given in Rise of the Beasts. Part of the reason why this is a problem is that thing that we nerds tend to like to ignore. The general audience. Even casual Transformers fans, or those who are movie-only fans, or who haven't read the comics or only watched 1 cartoon or absorbed only 1 continuity. To know about Transwarp Energy's time travel abilities, you'd have to have watched Beast Wars, read the Beast Wars comics, read the Marvel IDW comics, consumed Ask Vector Prime, or done a 3 AM binge read of the TF Wiki. I have done all of those. Otherwise, all the key looks like is a magic portal generator. So here's how I would fix this. Make it explicit that the Maximals are from the future, but Jungle Planet is a colony in the distant past. Unicron awakens and he seeks out the transwarp key, which will allow him to travel to the future, not just across space. The Maximals use the transwarp key to travel to then prehistoric Earth and hide the key from Unicron. This doesn't fix everything, unfortunately. I had initially thought about the Jungle Planet colony also being in the future, and then the Maximals would then travel back in time, but then I ran into the problem of how did the Terracons get there? If they're capable of time travel, why isn't Unicron? Which could also be fixed with an explicit explanation that the transwarp energy required to transport something that massive across space and time would need to be immense. But again, that's me doing the movie's job for it. But even Jungle Planet being in the past doesn't fix everything, as now I'm expected to believe that Unicron has been searching for the key for thousands if not millions of years and hasn't made any progress. Again, I could buy this had the movie explained why, and that is the real issue here. I have to come up with reasons to make the plot make sense. I have to lean on external knowledge, theories, and handwaves. I can accept a few handwaves, don't get me wrong. But this is the entire point of the movie. The entire central plot. This would be like if Lord of the Rings didn't expand on the One Ring, and we didn't know why Sauron needed it other than it would help him advance his plans. The movie tells us that Unicron is trapped in Jungle Planet's galaxy, but it never tells us why, or even where that is. I've been assuming it's in the Hadean system because of my own prior knowledge of Transformers lore, but that's not even necessarily the case. That's again, me doing the movie's job. And regardless of where, why would he be trapped? Space travel is at least explicitly possible, and the Terracons do it effortlessly, so why is Unicron trapped? Why do Primal and Scourge and Apelink constantly make references to Unicron being trapped, when they never explain why? Even making the Maximal plot less vague doesn't fix this fundamental issue with the story, and it certainly doesn't fix Optimus Prime's drive to get the key either. But if it were capable of time travel, and that were made explicit, then maybe Optimus could want to use it to go back in time and prevent the war from ever happening, which actually could have made his acceptance of destroying the key more powerful. So it's not a way home thing, it's a stop the war once and for all thing. That is a vastly more interesting motivation for Optimus, and I just came up with it off the top of my head. Now that we're talking about Optimus, though, let's move on to the Autobots subplot. Now, motivations aside, there's not much to this one. It is typical hunt down the MacGuffin before the bad guys do stuff, but unfortunately nothing interesting is done with that. It is the most MacGuffin-hunty MacGuffin hunt that ever MacGuffin hunted. I am a huge proponent of the saying, tropes are tools, what matters is how you use them. Few tropes are outright bad. Note I said few. There are definitely some that should be avoided at all costs. I can make a story filled to the brim with the tropiest nonsense you've ever seen, but if I do something interesting with it, the only people that will care are Redditors and pretentious video essayists and reviewers who say a lot but don't put their money where their mouth is. Part of why I made the rewrites in the first place was to avoid being grouped in with that lot. That, and I love writing. Think about Transformers 1. At the core of the story is the hunt for the Matrix, but is that really the part we remember? No. We remember the character dynamics, especially around these two friends growing apart. By the time Orion gets the Matrix, we care less about him finding, air quotes, the thing, and more about the mutual births of Optimus Prime and Megatron, and how the dynamic has changed since the beginning of the movie. Even the '86 movie, is the Matrix what we remember, or is it Hot Rod's journey? To bring up Lord of the Rings again, the ring is a vital part of that movie's plot, but it's not the main thing we remember. In the books, it's the incredible and detailed fantasy world and the epic adventure that we remember. In the movies, it's, again, the characters and their arcs. The Death Star plans are the MacGuffin of Star Wars A New Hope, but is that the first thing anyone recalls about that movie? Absolutely not. Once again, characters and world building. But what can I say about what drives the Autobots in Rise of the Beast other than get the thing before the bad guys get the thing? Nothing, zilch, nada. If you get that reference, you are also elite. What can I say about the dynamic between the Autobots? Optimus and RC are annoyed at Mirage, Optimus and B are close, or... yeah, that's it. And the dynamic between the Autobots and Maximals is non-existent except Prime and Primal. We get more between Mirage and Noah, Prime and Noah, and Ares and Elena than we get between the robots themselves, which harkens back to an issue I had in all but the first and fourth Bay movies. Shatter and Dropkick have more of a dynamic than any of the robot protagonists in this movie. Now, I do like that the bots and humans have a dynamic, better than the humans either being pointless or the robots just being set dressing, but I find myself thinking of Transformers Prime, Animated, Beast Wars, Armada, Cybertron, even G1. Even shows I don't like Energon or Earthspark or ID15, these all have well-defined dynamics between the robots. Animated Beast Wars and Prime have the best, in my opinion, which tracks, as those are my three favorites from a storytelling perspective, though Beast Wars' poorly aged animation knocks down a few pegs in overall ranking. The Autobot plot is serviceable, but it's nothing special. And that really sucks. Noah's plot is, with a few lags here and there, probably the best plot in the movie. It's clearly defined, his motivations make sense, he has an arc that works, and I can buy him going on this quest, kind of. I'll get to that later. At least I feel his character writing tracks with him going. Noah and Optimus's joint plot also works for me, kind of. I like that they grow to respect each other, I just wish that Optimus's half of the arc felt more Optimus-y. Elena's arc is little better than her character. Like Noah, it does track that she'd go on this quest. In this case, I just wish the character was better, because she could have easily been the Eevee to Noah's Rick from The Mummy, though if you got that one without me telling you, you are also elite. With or without romance, I don't care either way. But she unfortunately felt less like a co-protagonist and more like, again, an afterthought, even in the plot department. The impending threat of Unicron, his motivations far to the side, was also pretty good. They effectively Sauroned the Unicron character. The villains also worked, and I'd say a little bit better than the heroes, because even if Unicron's need for the key is baffling, Scourge serving his master works fine. Bumblebee's death and resurrection wasn't necessary. Now, I have not been shy about killing Bumblebee in the past, because that little bugger has some major plot armor that I don't like. Some might thus expect me to say, Bee should have stayed dead. But they'd be wrong. I think Bee should have never died in the first place. This story arc ended up feeling like a less impactful version of Optimus's own death and resurrection in Revenge of the Fallen. Yes, you heard me correctly, I am praising an aspect of Revenge of the Fallen's plot. Mark the calendars, this will never happen again. Unless I'm just talking about the forest battle, which I am on record as actually really liking. One of my favorite fights in the franchise, and one of my least favorite entries. Go figure. We already knew the Terracons were bad news because of Ape Link, and there's a perfectly viable reason to let the Autobots all survive with Air-Razor's arrival. We didn't need the death of Bumblebee, reign of the Bumblemen, and the return of Bumblebee. And finally, the G.I. Joe plot in the background. There's not really anything to say here, yet. So there's the various plot threads of Rise of the Beasts. Yeah, that's a lot. And oh boy, is it a mess. As I look back, a lot of what I loved in my first watch was me filling in the gaps with out-of-universe knowledge and fan theories. But looking at the plot as is, it is thin, bare bones, filled with holes, contrivances, and gaps. It's not all bad, and quite a bit is passable, but this movie is definitely worse than I remembered in the plot department. If I were to suggest a couple of fixes to make this plot more coherent, it would be this. First, cut the Maximals. This movie was trying to be a Bumblebee sequel, a Beast Wars movie, an Endgame-style team-up without the 10 years of build-up, and the beginning of a new trilogy. It could have gotten away with the first and the last, but trying to do the others was a mistake. Save the Beast stuff for its own movie, though I do have some positives to say about that later. Second, cut the humans. Now, I'm not one of those TF nerds who gets viscerally angry when humans even exist in a property. My gripe is when they become more important than the robots. If they fit well into the story and don't distract too heavily from the Transformers, I really don't care that they're here. However, this movie didn't need them, or at least, not new ones. Allow me to explain. The central story of this movie is based around the Transformers seeking to prevent Unicron from coming to Earth or escaping containment or whatever. If we think back to most Transformers stories involving Unicron, what do the humans do exactly? Not much. 86 movie. Spike is imprisoned with Bumblebee inside Unicron, and Daniel is just kinda along for the ride. Marvel G1. The humans are all on Earth while Unicron is attacking Cybertron. Armada. They help convince the cons to join the bots and see an alternate timeline or possible past where Unicron won, but they're mostly serving as audience surrogates. Prime. Raph getting injured is a catalyst for Optimus, and he gives Jack the key to Vector Sigma, but the humans do not play a direct role in this particular story arc, except as our eyes back at base with Ratchet. And in Predacons Rising, the humans aren't there at all. These kinds of stories don't need direct human participation. Even in my own story, Wrath of Unicron, the Nest agents never interacted with Unicron directly, except when Lennox and his team were captured with Team Prowl. but did aid in the fight against his minions. And I honestly struggled while writing that script to make their roles work. But here's the thing about Armada, TFP, and Wrath of Unicron. The reason the humans were there, end of the day, was because they were part of the main cast. They're here because they've been here for a while at this point, some from the beginning. Noah, much as I like him, does not have that luxury. Nor does Elena. The amount of time the movie dedicates to Noah being introduced to the world of the Transformers actively detracts from the Unicron aspect. So if this movie, as it is, were to have humans, bring back Charlie. She's already been introduced, she has a reason to go on this adventure, people already like her, and on the other hand, because this is a live-action movie and we do technically need a human cast because of that, alternate point 2, cut Unicron and the Terracons. I actually prefer this one, because the fact that we jump from such minor characters as Shatter and Dropkick to Unicron is insane. Much like the Beast Point, this needed to be saved for its own film, one that had build-up. Whether this is a reboot or a prequel, introducing Unicron this early in the game isn't a good idea, especially since we still haven't seen Megatron in this universe or timeline. And this is where the tethers to the Bayverse actively cripple this movie. In Bumblebee, they were an irritant at worst. Here, however, they actively damage the film. If this movie is a prequel, then the bots fought Unicron long before the Decepticons got here, teamed up with G.I. Joe long before Nest was a thing, and just left Earth after that without ever even looking for the Allspark, only to come back when Bumblebee learned the Allspark was here. Right. Megatron, Sentinel Prime, and the Fallen were all here under their noses while they were fighting Unicron the Terracons. Sector 7 somehow didn't ever interact with them despite their activities in Peru. And that's not even bringing into account the absolute nonsense introduced in Age of Extinction and The Last Night. Bumblebee was here before in the 40s and the 70s, then went back to Cybertron in the 80s, stayed on Earth through the 90s, and was left behind somewhere before 2007, only for the Autobots to come back. And despite being a giant planet monster in the 90s, somehow Unicron ends up being part of the Earth in the 2020s. And despite Primus's existence being a fact, as Scourge points out in this movie, Optimus is able to be convinced that Quintessa is his creator, and Lockdown serves the creators, plural. Right. Do you see why this is a problem yet? Bumblebee at least kind of worked as a prequel, until Optimus showed up at the end, then it was just, nah. But this film just doesn't work. I can't even hand-wave this. If this movie is canon to the Bayverse, it breaks even more than The Last Night did, and that's saying something. Look, Bayverse canon was never particularly tight, I have a whole video on that topic, but it required tie-in comics to make any amount of sense. The sequel movies broke the canon even further, completely disregarding the comics on top of the contradictions in the movies themselves. But if you squinted, it could still be the same canon, kind of like the aligned continuity, which I will talk about next time. But trying to squeeze Rise of the Beasts into both pre- and post-Age of Extinction canons just doesn't work. B kind of works with pre-canon until the end, but definitely not with post-canon. These aren't just contradictions or retcons. This is a whole other universe, and trying to pretend otherwise is just idiotic. I don't like being particularly mean to people. I have no personal beef with Michael Bay, for example. But Lorenzo de Bonaventura bothers me to no end. It's like he hasn't even watched these movies, any of them, but he keeps insisting on them being the same universe when this is... It's like trying to suggest Animated is a prequel to G1 because there's a younger Optimus. That's just... no. The fact that the guy responsible for funding these movies doesn't care about the story is insulting to me as a fan. The main reason why I love the Lord of the Rings movies and will fight tooth and nail to defend them from crazy book purists is because Peter Jackson cared. He cared about this universe, about this story, and he wanted it to be the best he could make it, despite the changes he made, many of which were necessary either for adaptation or entertainment reasons, and most of which are harmless. Not all, but most. There were missteps, yes, but every effort felt genuine. That did not feel like the case with The Hobbit, though, but that's a different story entirely. When a creator or a producer doesn't care, it infuriates me. This is also why I do not like studio and editorial interference. You aren't the creator, so shut up, move aside, and let the creator do their jobs. I do believe Stephen Caple Jr. cared, I just don't think he was given space to let it show. This movie being tied to the Bayverse damages both it and the Bayverse. Nobody wins in this scenario. Cody, over on the channel Pointless Hub, go check him out, he makes some great stuff, said that this movie was trying to be Bay without Bay, and he was right. He mostly used the term to describe the action, or Bayhem, but I want to take it a little further. This movie leans so heavily on the Bayverse, but has none of the trappings, and as such, it is jarring. I've given a few ideas to fix the plot of this movie, but honestly, this should have been taken back to the drawing board, treated like a reboot, and gone from there. They wanted to be the first in a trilogy? Great. Start from the beginning. At the end of Bumblebee, the Autobots arrive and begin to establish a base. They've been in hiding for 70 years, the Decepticons unable to find them, until something draws their attention, causing them to come to Earth. Megatron, Starscream, Soundwave, Thundercracker, Skywarp, and Thrust, just to use cons from the beginning of Bumblebee, plus Megatron. Shockwave would be left in command of Cybertron, as Megatron wants to get his hands on Optimus personally. Add a couple cons we didn't see to round out the roster, like Barricade and Breakdown, and the plot of the movie is then based around the cons hunting the Autobots. No MacGuffin needed. We either bring Charlie back, introduce Noah, or both. This gets us started on the trilogy, and we can build on the story in the sequels. After that trilogy, we have a Beast Wars movie, one that ends with the Maximals traveling through time and meeting the Autobots in a post-credit stinger. If we want to go the G.I. Joe team-up route, we have a standalone Joe movie come out next, maybe with some sequels to boot. Then we have a team-up movie with the Autobots and Maximals to take on Scourge and the Terrorcons. Sometime after that, we have our Transformers G.I. Joe team-up, and eventually it all culminates, Endgame style, with a battle against Unicron. Maybe there's movies in between, with The Fallen, Quintessence, Lockdown, an origin movie at some point, and boom. You have a Transformers cinematic universe, and one that doesn't feel like it's all just jam-packed into one trilogy of movies. The downfall of modern Hollywood. Rushed cinematic universes, among other things. Thing is, I like interconnected universes in my movies, but the MCU has become too big, too fast, and is unable to maintain the properties on its fringes, much like any empire in history, and all the others rush into it far too quickly, and they all fail utterly. Unfortunately, Rise of the Beast is the Batman v Superman or Amazing Spider-Man 2 of Transformers, a failed launching point for a cinematic universe with a cluttered plot and confusing characterization. But it wasn't all bad. So, now let me talk about the things that I liked. As in Bumblebee, the designs in this film are great, mostly. Optimus is definitely a downgrade, but he still looks good when he keeps his mask on. As a Beast Wars fan, it was awesome to see the Maximals in live action, even though they unfortunately felt tacked on. Having the two Optimuses together was undeniably cool, and back when this movie came out, it was enough for me to forgive most of the film's problems. That is no longer the case. The finale was pretty hype, even if I found the hordes of minions honestly unnecessary and confusing. I have no issues with any of the vocal performances, and Anthony Ramos was good as Noah. Little thing, I love how Prime has both his swords and his axe, like in Dark of the Moon. Scourge is an homage to multiple versions of that character, and that's pretty cool to me. Unicron looks great, and I love how they brought back his theme from 86. I also love that he devours planets in the way he does in 86, sticking the horns into the planet's surface. The return of Arrival to Earth was awesome. The various insignias on Scourge's grill were neat references. As I'm listing these positives, it is apparent to me that they are mostly nostalgia stuff. As I've said before, I like fan service, but fan service cannot save a flawed product. There is one prevailing problem in this movie that isn't based on plot, characterization, or ties to a universe it doesn't belong in. And that issue is the focus on human racism and out-of-universe representation that permeates this movie in a Transformers movie. Okay, covering all of my bases. In fiction, where humans living on Earth are the main, if not sole focus, if this kind of thing is implemented well, and a good story is told alongside it, I do not care. Often, I enjoy it. But whenever it's shoved into a piece of fiction that it doesn't belong in, such as epic high fantasy, certain sci-fi, not all to be clear, or friggin' Transformers, it bothers me. If there are aliens, elves, dragons, and whatever else as main staples of this story, the humans focusing so heavily on their ultimately minor issues of differences of melanin is kinda dumb. And when the humans are supposed to be side characters and audience surrogates in the story of the giant alien robots, then it definitely doesn't need to be brought up that often, if at all. One of the major bits of behind-the-scenes hype that this movie got was first Transformers movie directed by a person of color and starring people of color as all the human characters, all the main human characters. But, that's not as big a deal as it sounds. There have been 3 directors of the live-action movies and 4 sets of human protagonists. Capel was preceded by 2 guys, Michael Bay and Travis Knight, and one of those guys directed only 1 movie. Noah and Elena were preceded by Sam and Michaela/Carly, Cade and Tessa, and Charlie and Memo. And if you take into account the 40 years of Transformers history, do you know the amount of non-white representation both in characters and in actors there is? In all of the Japanese-only continuities, the human characters are, guess what? Japanese. In Armada, Carlos is Hispanic and Alexis is Vietnamese. In Animated, Professor Sumdak is Indian or from that region of Asia, making Sorry half Indian, half Cybertronian. In Prime, Miko is Japanese, Wrath is Hispanic, Fowler is black, and Jack may or may not be entirely white. I've never been really sure, actually. If we want to extend to voice actors, we got Scatman Crothers, Phil Lamar, Kevin Michael Richardson, Gina Torres, Cree Summer, Somali Montano, Ken Watanabe, all the various Japanese VAs who I'm unfamiliar with, Brian Tyree Henry, Keegan Michael Key, George Takei, Bumper Robinson, Johnny Young Bosch, Tony Todd, the list goes on. Transformers has never been some Euro-dominated franchise. For its entire existence, it's been at least partially Japanese. But at the end of the day, who cares? It's Transformers. They're robots. This is probably the most I've talked about so-called social issues on my channel, and that's because, unless they affect the media I discuss, my opinion on them is ultimately inconsequential. But on this most recent watch-through of Rise of the Beast, I noticed quite a bit of focus on racism in 1990s America, on top of the behind-the-scenes stuff I mentioned earlier in this section. I found myself going, wait, aren't I watching Transformers? And to clarify, I do not give a flying flip about the fact that Noah is Hispanic and Elena is black. I literally could not care less. I literally could not care less. This is very similar to my distaste of all the sexual stuff in the Bayverse. Why are we making references like that in this franchise? And yes, it bothered me in Beast Wars 2. Transformers has felt like a franchise usually untouched by those problems that permeate the human experience. Racism, sexism, intimate affairs, drugs, gang violence. It's either not there, or it's there in a fantasy way, like Synthen with drugs and Functionism with racism/classism, etc. My problem with all of this has much less to do with the specific problem of racial issues or representation, and more to do with my main issue with the Bayverse and some other Transformers properties. Too much focus on the humans and their problems. I was mildly forgiving of it in Bumblebee because it was a spin-off with a singular Autobot as the main character, but even then, Charlie's main issue wasn't tied into the main plot, nor did it distract from the main plot, except briefly with the Tina stuff, which I pointed out as a problem I had with that movie. I need to use G1 here as a positive example. Spike, Sparkplug, Chase, Carly. None of their stories really mattered outside of the time they spent with the Autobots. Chip is disabled. He's paraplegic. That is plain for everyone to see. But is his story focused around his issues as a disabled person? No. It's more focused around his intellect and how he uses it to help the bots. Carly is an MIT graduate. Is her story about being a woman in academia? Again, no. These are details of their characters, and I can definitely see disabled people being glad to be represented by a character like Chip, but that is not the central point of their existence here. All of these are some pretty flat characters, and far from what I'd call good, but the way in which they interact with the plot is good. I still think the Prime humans are great, though I do have some issues with Miko. Most outside stuff we deal with there is Jack and his mom, which is resolved in the later half of Season 1 with June learning about the Autobots, Jack's crush on Sierra and rivalry with Vince, which is minor, only playing a big role in a single episode, and Raph being grounded in one episode of Season 2. All three of those points also tie directly into the story of the Transformers, with June being abducted by Mech and Arachnid, Knockout being involved in street racing, and Silas working with Megatron to get the Damocles satellite. If the robots weren't involved, we wouldn't be focusing on those aspects of the kids' lives because the robots aren't involved. I'm sure Jack or even Miko have been on their share of dates respectively, not together. But we didn't need to see them. Miko's probably experienced her own share of racism in Jasper. Raph might even have experienced it. Fowler I can almost guarantee has due to his age and his time in the military. Professor Sumdac in Animated might have as well, especially when first building his robotics empire. But none of that is important to the story of the Transformers. And that is my point. A Transformers movie should not have had such a big focus put on it, behind the scenes and on camera, on representation and racism. If there is representation, awesome. Jazz is black-coded and always has been, and nobody is complaining about his existence. I'm not going to complain if there are non-white or whatever characters here. But I'm here for the robots. If there is a plea I can make to any future Transformers writers, it is this. Focus on the Transformers. I'm not going to tell you to get rid of the humans. Just don't focus on them. And if you do, make sure it doesn't distract from the robots. We're not here for them. We're not here for their issues. We're here to see the robots fight their war. Rise of the Beasts was definitely weaker than I remember it being. I almost feel bad for being as critical of this movie as I am, but it should have been better. The plot was messy, the MacGuffin was confusing, the characters were hit or miss, the tethers to the Bayverse actively damaged the film, and the focus on distinctly human problems once more distracted from the reason why everyone is watching this movie in the first place. It rushed into telling a story that needed far more build-up. Half of the cast could have been cut, and the movie would have been better for it. Some of the designs were utterly baffling. Any thoughts I have of rewriting this movie just make me think it should go back to the drawing board. Where would I rank this movie after this retrospective? Much lower than I had before. I go back to my tier list video I made a while back, and I stand by the first Bay movie and Dark of the Moon both being better than this movie. Honestly, I would have to put Rise of the Beasts on par with Age of Extinction, because they have very similar strengths and weaknesses. The real problem with Rise of the Beasts isn't that it fundamentally fails at Transformers, but that it just doesn't succeed, both at being a movie and at being Transformers. I think back to when the movie first came out, and I once more think that I wanted to like this movie more than I actually did. Because I want to see this franchise succeed. But it can't succeed if we accept mediocrity, and Rise of the Beasts is, ultimately, mediocre. Thank you all for joining me on my quest. If you enjoyed the video and like what I do here, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel further, consider joining the Knights Realm Patreon or becoming a member here on YouTube for $1 a month or $1.99 a month, respectively, and gain access to exclusive content, including videos not available on the main channel and supercuts of my rewrites. More of that will be coming, likely after my Aligned retrospective. Alternatively, if you'd like to vote on future video or series topics, you can join me at $5 or $5.99 a month. First poll will go live with the first part of Man of Steel goes up. If you'd like to make a one-time donation, you can always leave a super thanks in the comments below. In any case, I will see you all on our next adventure, whenever that may be.